I was standing in my driveway at 7 in the morning, coffee mug in hand, staring at what used to be my vegetable garden when I heard the first bulldozer rumble to life. The morning sun was just beginning to paint the Portland, Oregon sky in shades of pink and orange. And there, right where my tomatoes had been thriving just yesterday, sat a crew of construction workers preparing to destroy everything I had spent 3 years building. My name is Owen Granger, and I had moved into the Riverside Meadows subdivision 4 years ago after my divorce. The house was modest, a 3-bedroom ranch-style home with a decent-sized backyard that backed up to a small creek. What sold me on the property was the extra lot adjacent to my backyard that the previous owner had used as extended yard space. When I purchased the house, that lot came with it. It was all in the deed, clear as day. I had turned that space into something special, a thriving vegetable garden with raised beds, a small greenhouse, and a meditation area where I could decompress after long days working as a civil engineer for the city. The Homeowners Association had always been a thorn in my side. Riverside Meadows HOA was run with an iron fist by a woman named Patricia Vandermeer, a 52-year-old former real estate agent who treated the neighborhood like her personal fiefdom. She had short blonde hair styled in that particular way that screamed entitlement, always wore pastel-colored blazers, and drove a white BMW SUV with a custom license plate that read, HOPRES. From day one, she had been sending me violation notices for the most ridiculous things. My mailbox was supposedly 2 inches too tall. My lawn was a 1/4 inch longer than regulation. My garden gnome was not on the approved decorative items list. I had ignored most of her nonsense, paid the occasional fine when I had to, and generally tried to stay off her radar. But this morning was different. This morning, Patricia had apparently decided that my garden lot, the one I legally owned, was going to become additional parking for the neighborhood. "Excuse me," I called out, walking toward the construction crew. "What exactly do you think you are doing?" A burly man in a hard hat looked up from his clipboard. "We are paving this lot for parking. HOA orders. You need to step back behind the property line, sir." "This is my property line," I said, my voice rising. "That garden you are about to destroy is mine. I own this lot." The foreman shrugged. "I just go where the work orders tell me. You got a problem, take it up with the HOA. We start work in 10 minutes. I pulled out my phone and immediately called Patricia. It rang 4 times before her saccharine voice answered. "Owen, good morning. What can I do for you?" "You can tell me why there is a construction crew about to pave over my garden," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "Oh, that," she said, and I could practically hear her dismissive wave through the phone. "The HOA board voted last month to convert that unused lot into community parking. We have had numerous complaints about insufficient parking for guests, and we determined that lot was the perfect solution." "That lot is not unused, Patricia. It is my garden. I own it. It is in my deed." "Actually, Owen, if you had attended the HOA meetings, you would know that we discovered an error in your deed. That lot was supposed to remain community property. Your purchase was a mistake that we are now correcting. You will receive a formal notice in the mail." My hand tightened around the phone. "You cannot just take my property because you decided there was an error. That is not how property law works. The board has consulted with our attorney, and everything is completely legal. Now, I suggest you move your belongings out of the way before they get damaged. Have a wonderful day, Owen." She hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, watching as the construction crew began marking out the area. My greenhouse. My raised beds full of heirloom tomatoes, peppers, squash, and herbs. The apple tree I had planted 2 years ago. The stone path I had laid by hand, all of it about to be destroyed. I did the only thing I could think of. I called the police. Officer Martinez arrived about 20 minutes later, just as the crew was preparing to start demolition. He was a young guy, probably late 20s, who listened patiently as I explained the situation and showed him my property deed on my phone. "Sir, this is really a civil matter," he said after reviewing everything. "If you have proof of ownership, you need to get an emergency injunction from a judge. I cannot stop a construction crew based on a property dispute. So they can just destroy my property while I wait for the courts. I am sorry, Mr. Granger. My hands are tied. This is between you and the HOA." He tipped his hat apologetically and left. I called every attorney's office I could find on my phone. It was a Friday morning, and most were either in court or booked solid. Finally, on my 8th call, I reached the law office of Rebecca Chen, who agreed to see me immediately after I explained the urgency. I took photos and videos of everything, documenting every plant, every structure, every detail of my garden. Then I grabbed my deed and every piece of paperwork I had related to the property and drove like a madman to downtown Portland. Rebecca Chen's office was in a renovated building near the waterfront. She was a sharp woman in her mid-40s with dark hair pulled back in a professional bun and glasses that gave her an intense, focused look. She listened to my story without interruption, reviewed my documents, and then leaned back in her chair. "They cannot do this," she said flatly. "Your deed is clear. You own that lot. Even if there was an error, which I do not see any evidence of, they would need to go through proper legal channels. They cannot just seize your property. Can you stop them? Right now," she checked her watch. "Judge Morrison is hearing emergency petitions this afternoon. I can have an injunction request filed within the hour. But Owen, I need to be honest with you. Even if we get the injunction today, if they have already started destruction, the damage will be done. How much is this going to cost me?" "My retainer is $5,000. If this goes to trial, which it likely will based on what you are telling me about this HOA president, we are looking at potentially $20,000 to $30,000 in legal fees." I felt sick. I was not rich. I made a decent living, but that kind of money would drain my savings. Still, what choice did I have? "Do it. File everything. I will get you the retainer today." Rebecca worked fast. By noon, we were standing in Judge Morrison's courtroom. Patricia had been notified and showed up with the HOA's attorney, a slick-looking man named Donald Pierce, who wore an expensive suit and an expression of bored superiority. Judge Morrison was a black woman in her 60s with a no-nonsense demeanor. She reviewed the documents quickly and then looked up at Pierce. "Counselor, explain to me how your client intends to pave over property that clearly belongs to Mr. Granger according to this deed." Pierce smiled smoothly. "Your Honor, the HOA has documentation showing that lot was designated as community property in the original subdivision plans from 1998. Mr. Granger's deed contains an error that was not caught during the sale. We are simply correcting that error. You have that documentation with you." "It is being retrieved from storage, Your Honor. We will submit it by Monday." Rebecca stood. "Your Honor, that lot has been part of Mr. Granger's property for 4 years. He has improved it extensively. The HOA has never contested his ownership until now, when they decided they wanted to use it for parking. This is a clear case of attempted property seizure without due process." Judge Morrison looked at Pierce again. "Has the HOA filed any legal claim to this property?" "Not yet, Your Honor. We plan to do so after the improvement work was completed." "After the improvement work was completed," the judge repeated slowly. So your plan was to seize and alter the property, and then argue about ownership later. We did not seize anything, Your Honor. We are reclaiming community property. Based on documentation you do not have with you and apparently cannot produce immediately. Judge Morrison shook her head. I am granting the emergency injunction. All construction on that lot is to cease immediately until this matter is properly adjudicated. We will have a full hearing in 2 weeks. Mr. Pierce, your client better have their documentation in order. We rushed back to my house, but I knew before we pulled onto my street what we would find. The construction crew had worked fast. By the time we arrived at 2 in the afternoon, my garden was gone. The raised beds had been demolished, the soil scattered. My greenhouse was crushed, twisted metal and shattered glass pushed into a pile. The apple tree had been ripped out, leaving a gaping hole in the ground. They had already graded the lot and were beginning to lay the foundation for the parking area. I stood there, Rebecca beside me, and felt something break inside me. 3 years of work, hundreds of hours, plants I had nurtured from seeds, all destroyed in a matter of hours. Rebecca pulled out her phone and started taking photos and videos. This is good, she said quietly. Good, I stared at her. My garden is destroyed. Good for our case. They violated a judge's order. They destroyed your property without legal justification. Owen, they just handed us a winning lawsuit on a silver platter. The foreman saw us and walked over, looking uncomfortable. Sorry, man. We did not know about any court order. We just got a call from the HOA lady saying to work fast and get it done today. Who called you? Rebecca asked sharply. Patricia something. The HOA president. She said there might be some trouble and we should finish before end of business today. Rebecca smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Thank you. That is very helpful. Over the next 2 weeks I lived in a state of constant anger. Every time I looked out my window and saw that bare lot, my blood pressure spiked. Patricia sent me a formal letter claiming the lot had always been HOA property and that I owed them for the cost of removing my unauthorized structures. The bill was for $8,000. I showed the letter to Rebecca during one of our preparation meetings. We were building our case, and it was getting bigger by the day. Rebecca had done her research and discovered that not only was my deed completely legitimate, but the HOA's claim about original subdivision plans was false. She had pulled the original documents from the county, and that lot had always been designated as part of my property parcel. They fabricated evidence, Rebecca explained, or they planned to. Either way, this has gone from a property dispute to potential fraud. The hearing arrived on a cold Tuesday morning in late October. The courtroom was more crowded this time. Several of my neighbors had shown up, some supporting me, others clearly there to watch me get what Patricia had probably told them I deserved. Judge Morrison called the court to order and looked at both sides. Mr. Pierce, do you have the documentation you claimed would prove the HOA's ownership of the disputed lot? Pierce stood, and for the first time, he looked less confident. Your Honor, we have encountered some difficulties locating the specific documents we referenced. However, we have other evidence that suggests. So you do not have the documentation you told this court would prove your case. Not the original documents, no, but... And in the 2 weeks since our last hearing, during which I issued a specific injunction to halt construction, your client not only continued but completed the destruction of Mr. Granger's property. Is that correct? Pierce shifted uncomfortably. There was a miscommunication, Your Honor. The construction company was not properly informed of the injunction. Rebecca stood. Your Honor, we have testimony from the construction foreman stating that Patricia Vandermeer personally called him and instructed him to work quickly and complete the project before end of business that day. after our hearing. This was a deliberate violation of your order. Judge Morrison's expression darkened. Miss Vandermeer, please stand. Patricia stood, still wearing one of her pastel blazers, this one a pale pink that made her look like an angry piece of cotton candy. Yes, Your Honor. Did you instruct the construction company to continue work after I issued an injunction? Your Honor, I was not personally served with the injunction. I did not receive official notification until later that evening. The injunction was issued at approximately 1 p.m. When did you call the construction company? Patricia hesitated. I am not certain of the exact time. Rebecca pulled out her phone. Your Honor, I subpoenaed the construction company's phone records. Patricia Vandermeer called them at 2:15 p.m., over an hour after the injunction was issued. The judge looked at Patricia with clear distaste. Miss Vandermeer, you will sit down. Mr. Pierce, I suggest you advise your client that she is very close to being held in contempt. The hearing continued for 3 hours. Rebecca systematically demolished every argument the HOA made. She presented my original deed, the county records showing the lot had always been part of my property, documentation of all the improvements I had made, and photos of the destruction. She also presented evidence that the HOA had never paid property taxes on the lot, further proving they had never owned it. Then she called me to the stand. Mr. Granger, can you describe what that garden meant to you? I took a breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. After my divorce, I was in a dark place. That garden gave me purpose. I grew my own food, organic vegetables that I shared with my neighbors. I had a meditation space where I could find peace. It was not just a garden. It was my therapy, my sanctuary. I put 3 years of my life into creating something beautiful and meaningful. And what did you feel when you saw it destroyed? Like someone had taken a part of me and crushed it. All those plants, some I had grown from seeds my grandmother gave me before she passed. The apple tree was planted on what would have been my wedding anniversary. That garden held memories, effort, love, and they destroyed it in hours like it was garbage. I saw a few people in the courtroom wipe their eyes. Even Judge Morrison's expression softened slightly. Patricia's attorney tried to argue that I had been compensated by no longer having to maintain the garden, which was such a ridiculous argument that even some of the HOA supporters in the courtroom looked embarrassed. When both sides rested, Judge Morrison did not even take a recess to deliberate. I am ruling in favor of Mr. Granger. The evidence is overwhelming that he legally owns that lot and that the HOA destroyed his property without justification and in violation of a court order. Mr. Granger, you are entitled to compensation for the destruction of your property and to have your lot restored to its previous condition. Rebecca stood. Your Honor, we are requesting damages in the amount of $50,000 to cover restoration costs, replacement of mature plants and structures, emotional distress, and legal fees. We are also requesting that the court order the HOA to immediately remove the parking area they constructed and restore the lot to its original condition with equivalent plants and structures. Pierce jumped up. Your Honor, $50,000 is excessive. The improvements Mr. Granger made could not have cost more than a few $1,000s. Rebecca pulled out a document. I have estimates from 3 landscape companies. To replace mature plants, rebuild a greenhouse, construct raised beds identical to the originals, and restore the soil quality will cost approximately $35,000. The remaining $15,000 covers Mr. Granger's legal fees and compensation for emotional distress and loss of use of his property. Judge Morrison reviewed the estimates. The court awards Owen Granger $50,000 in damages. The Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association is ordered to pay this amount within 30 days and to restore the property to its previous condition within 90 days, subject to Mr. Granger's approval of the restoration work. Additionally, I am fining Patricia Vandermeer personally $1,000 for contempt of court for her deliberate violation of my injunction. This case is closed. The courtroom erupted. Patricia turned red, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Several of my neighbors came up to congratulate me. One older woman named Susan, who lived 3 houses down, grabbed my hand. "Good for you, Owen. Patricia has been terrorizing this neighborhood for years. Maybe now she will think twice." But I knew this was not over. People like Patricia did not accept defeat gracefully. The HOA appealed the decision, which meant everything was put on hold for another 3 months. During that time, the parking area they had built sat empty, a constant reminder of what they had taken from me. Patricia continued her reign of terror in the neighborhood, seemingly taking out her frustration by increasing violation notices to everyone. Mailboxes, lawn length, holiday decorations, everything became a target. I started documenting everything. Every notice I received, every interaction with Patricia, every HOA board meeting I attended. I also started talking to my neighbors, really talking to them, and discovered I was far from the only person who had problems with Patricia and the HOA board. Tom Hendricks, who lived on the corner, had been fined $1,500 because his son's basketball hoop was visible from the street. The HOA rules said recreational equipment had to be stored out of sight, but Tom had installed the hoop permanently in his driveway as a gift for his kid's birthday. Margaret Wu had been threatened with a lien on her house because she painted her front door a shade of blue that was not on the approved color list. The approved color was colonial blue and hers was sky blue. The difference was barely noticeable, but the HOA insisted she repaint or face fines of $100 per day. The Santos family had been denied permission to install a wheelchair ramp for their elderly father who had moved in with them. The HOA claimed it would be an aesthetic disruption to the neighborhood's uniform appearance. They had to carry their father up and down the front steps every time he left the house. The more I learned, the angrier I became. This was not about maintaining property values or community standards. This was about control and power, with Patricia wielding the HOA like a weapon to make herself feel important. I called a meeting at my house one evening and invited everyone who had complaints about the HOA. 23 people showed up, cramming into my living room with stories of harassment, arbitrary fines, and ridiculous rules enforced inconsistently. "We need to do something," Margaret Wu said. "But what can we do? The HOA has all the power." "Not all the power," I said. "We are the homeowners. The HOA works for us, not the other way around. We can vote out the board." Tom shook his head. "Patricia controls the votes. She has a block of supporters who vote however she tells them. We have tried before. Then we need to get more people involved." "How many homeowners are in Riverside Meadows?" 147, Susan answered. She had been the neighborhood treasurer before Patricia took over. But only about 30 people usually vote in HOA elections. So if we can get 50 people to vote, we can change everything. Over the next month, we organized. We went door to door, talking to neighbors, sharing stories, building a coalition. Some people were too afraid of retaliation from Patricia to join us openly, but they promised to vote when the time came. The HOA's appeal was denied in early January. The court upheld Judge Morrison's ruling, and the HOA was ordered to pay me the $50,000 and restore my property immediately. Patricia had to sign the check herself, and I wish I could have seen her face when she did it. The money hit my account on a Thursday. On Friday, 3 landscape companies showed up at my house to begin the restoration work. Rebecca had insisted on managing the project herself to ensure the HOA could not sabotage it or claim they had completed inadequate work. Watching the restoration was bittersweet. They rebuilt the raised beds, installed a new greenhouse that was actually better than my original, brought in mature plants to replace what had been destroyed. They even found an apple tree of the same variety and age as mine, which cost a fortune but was included in the restoration order. The soil was amended and enriched. New stone paths were laid. Within 6 weeks, the lot looked like a garden again, but it was not my garden. These plants I had not raised from seeds. This space I had not built with my own hands over years. It was like having a replica of something precious, functional but soulless. Still, I was grateful. And I was determined to make sure Patricia never did this to anyone else. The annual HOA board election was scheduled for March. Our coalition had grown to 67 committed voters, enough to completely replace the board if we could get everyone to show up. Patricia must have sensed something was coming, because she went on the offensive. 2 weeks before the election, every member of our coalition received violation notices for various infractions. My mailbox was supposedly crooked. Tom's house number was the wrong font. Margaret's lawn had dandelions. The fines ranged from $200 to $500 each. It was a transparent intimidation tactic, and it backfired. People who had been on the fence about joining us were pushed over the edge by the obvious retaliation. By election day, we had 83 committed voters. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a building that the HOA fees paid for but that Patricia treated like her personal office. I arrived early with Rebecca, who had agreed to observe the proceedings to ensure everything was conducted properly. Patricia was already there, setting up the registration table with 2 of her board members, Linda Marsh and Gregory Kent. Both were middle-aged, both had that same entitled air, both had benefited from Patricia's reign by getting special permissions for things other homeowners were denied. As people filed in, I saw Patricia's confident expression slowly shift to concern, then to alarm. The clubhouse held about 100 people, and by 7 p.m. when the meeting was called to order, we had 96 voters present, the largest turnout in Riverside Meadows history. Patricia tried to control the meeting, but our coalition had studied the HOA bylaws extensively. We knew every rule, every procedure. When Patricia tried to limit discussion, Tom stood up and cited the exact bylaw that guaranteed homeowners the right to speak. When Linda tried to rush the voting process, Susan invoked the provision requiring a minimum of 30 minutes for nominations and statements. We had nominated a full slate of candidates: myself for president, Susan for treasurer, Tom for vice president, and 3 other neighbors for the remaining board positions. Each of us gave a statement about our vision for the HOA, focusing on fairness, transparency, and actually serving the homeowners instead of bullying them. Patricia's statement was defensive and angry. She talked about maintaining standards and property values, about how ungrateful homeowners did not appreciate the hard work she did to keep the neighborhood pristine. She accused our coalition of trying to turn Riverside Meadows into a slum. It did not play well. Even some of her supporters looked uncomfortable. The vote was by secret ballot. Rebecca observed the counting along with a neutral third party we had hired specifically for that purpose. When the results were announced, our entire slate had won. I received 89 votes to Patricia's 7. The other positions were similarly lopsided. Patricia stood up, her face purple with rage. "This is a travesty. You people do not understand what you have done. This neighborhood will fall apart without proper leadership. What we have done, I said calmly, is take back our community from someone who abused her power. The HOA is supposed to serve homeowners, Patricia, not rule over them. You forgot that. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, Linda and Gregory following behind her. The room erupted in applause. Our first act as the new HOA board was to review and revise the rules. We eliminated the ridiculous requirements about mailbox heights and lawn lengths beyond what the city required. We created a reasonable process for requesting modifications to homes. We established clear, written guidelines for violations and fines, with an appeals process. We opened the books and showed homeowners exactly where their fees were going. We also discovered some interesting financial irregularities. Patricia had been using HOA funds to pay for landscaping at her own house, disguising it as community beautification projects. Over 3 years, she had embezzled nearly $18,000. I called Rebecca immediately. Is this criminal? Absolutely. That is embezzlement and fraud. You need to report it to the police. The investigation took 2 months. Detective Sarah Clarkson from the Portland Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit interviewed board members, reviewed documents, and built a case. In May, Patricia Vandermeer was arrested at her home and charged with embezzlement, fraud, and theft. I was not there for the arrest, but Tom was driving by and saw it happen. He said Patricia screamed at the officers that this was a witch hunt, that I had fabricated everything out of revenge. The evidence spoke for itself. Patricia's trial was in August. She had hired an expensive defense attorney who tried to argue that the expenses were legitimate HOA business costs. The prosecution brought in forensic accountants who showed definitively that Patricia had directed HOA funds to pay for work done exclusively on her personal property, including a new irrigation system, professional landscaping design, and monthly maintenance that other homeowners had to pay for themselves. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Patricia was found guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison and ordered her to pay restitution of $18,000 to the HOA. Standing outside the courthouse after the sentencing, Susan turned to me. Do you feel like justice was served? I thought about my garden, about the 3 years I had spent building something beautiful that was destroyed in hours, about the money I had spent on lawyers and the stress that had taken years off my life, about all the neighbors Patricia had bullied and intimidated. Justice was served, I said, but it should not have taken this much to get here. People like Patricia thrive because people do not push back. They count on us being too tired or too intimidated or too busy to fight. We fought and we won. That matters. What about your garden? Do you feel like you got back what you lost? I shook my head. The restored garden is nice and I am grateful for it, but what I built originally, that is gone forever. Some things you cannot get back, no matter how much money you throw at them. But I have something else now. I have a community that stood together. I have neighbors who are not afraid anymore. That is worth something too. Over the following months, Riverside Meadows changed. The atmosphere of fear and resentment that had hung over the neighborhood dissipated. People started talking to each other again, helping each other. We organized community events, real ones where people actually wanted to participate, not mandatory meetings where Patricia lectured us about rule violations. I worked on my restored garden, slowly making it mine. I planted new seeds, including some varieties I had never tried before. I built a small bench where neighbors could sit and visit. I installed a little library box where people could exchange books and seeds. Tom's son's basketball hoop stayed up, and other kids in the neighborhood joined him for games in the driveway. Margaret's blue door became a neighborhood landmark. The Santos family got their wheelchair ramp, which we approved in about 5 minutes during a board meeting, and we apologized that they had ever been denied. One Saturday afternoon in September, I was working in the garden when a car pulled up. A young couple got out, looking around the neighborhood with interest. "Excuse me," the woman called. "Do you live here?" "I do," I said, walking over to the fence. "We are thinking about buying a house in this subdivision. Can you tell us what it is like living here?" "How is the HOA?" I smiled. "The HOA is fine. We just elected a new board that actually cares about the community. But let me give you some advice. If you move into any neighborhood with an HOA, read the bylaws carefully. Pay attention to who is running things and how they operate. And if you see someone abusing their power, do not be afraid to push back. A lot of people think HOAs have unlimited authority, but they do not. They work for the homeowners, and homeowners can always take back control." The couple thanked me and moved on. I returned to my garden, digging my hands into the rich soil, feeling the sun warm on my back. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "How's the garden looking?" "Getting there," I texted back. "Planted some new tomatoes today. You should come by and see it sometime." "I'll take you up on that." You know, your case has become something of a legend in legal circles. I've had 3 other clients come to me with HOA disputes in the past month, all citing what we accomplished. I smiled at that. Maybe something good had come from all of this after all. Maybe other people would be inspired to stand up for themselves, to not let bullies like Patricia run roughshod over their rights. That evening, the new HOA board met at my house for our monthly meeting. We had moved the meetings from the clubhouse to rotating locations in members' homes, making them more informal and accessible. Susan brought her famous cookies, Tom brought beer, and we conducted business in my living room like friends solving problems together rather than bureaucrats enforcing rules. "First order of business," I said. "We received a request from the Hendersons on Oak Street to install solar panels. They have submitted the required paperwork and the panels meet all city codes." "I move we approve it," Susan said immediately. "Seconded," Tom added. "All in favor?" Everyone's hand went up. "Approved." That was easy. Next item, we need to schedule the fall neighborhood cleanup day. "Margaret, did you book the dumpster?" We worked through the agenda efficiently, dealing with actual community issues rather than petty complaints and power trips. After the official business concluded, we sat around talking and laughing, and I realized this was what community was supposed to feel like. "You know," Susan said, "I was thinking about something. We should create a garden club. Several people have mentioned wanting to start gardens but not knowing where to begin. Owen, you could teach them." "I like that idea," I said. "We could do seed swaps, share tools, help each other with projects." Patricia would have had an aneurysm at the thought of vegetables growing in front yards, Tom laughed. "Well, Patricia is in prison now, so she does not get a vote," Margaret said, and we all raised our glasses to that. Later that night, after everyone left, I walked out to my garden in the darkness. The restored greenhouse glowed softly with the LED lights I used for seedlings. The raised beds were full of late summer vegetables ready for harvest. The apple tree, while not the one I had planted, was thriving and would bear fruit next year. It was not the same garden I had lost, but it was becoming something new and equally meaningful. The difference was that now it represented not just my personal journey but a community's journey, a fight for justice and the right to exist without fear in your own home. I thought about Patricia, sitting in a prison cell, probably still convinced she had done nothing wrong. People like her never really understood that power without compassion is just tyranny. She had wielded the HOA like a weapon, and ultimately that weapon had destroyed her. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from a neighbor I did not know well, James, who lived at the far end of the subdivision. "Hey, Owen, heard about the garden club idea. I would love to join. I have wanted to grow vegetables, but my last HOA president told me it would lower property values. Thanks for everything you have done for this neighborhood." I smiled and texted back. "First meeting next Saturday at my place. Bring any questions you have and we will figure it out together." The next morning, I woke early and made coffee, then headed out to the garden to harvest tomatoes. The plants were heavy with fruit, more than I could possibly eat myself. I picked several baskets full, along with peppers, squash, and herbs. I spent the morning going door to door, giving away vegetables to neighbors. Some I knew well, others I was still getting to know. Each doorstep conversation lasted a few minutes, people sharing stories, making connections, building the kind of neighborhood that Patricia's iron fist had prevented from existing. Mrs. Kim, an elderly Korean woman who lived alone, teared up when I gave her a basket of tomatoes and peppers. "You are a good man, Owen. After my husband died, I felt so alone here. Patricia made me feel like a burden, always complaining about something, but now this neighborhood feels like home again." "You are not a burden, Mrs. Kim. You are part of this community. If you ever need anything, please let me know." At Tom's house, his son answered the door, basketball in hand. "Hey, Mr. Granger, want to shoot some hoops?" I looked at the vegetables in my hands, then at the kid's hopeful face. "You know what? Sure. Let me drop these inside first." We played for 20 minutes, and other kids from the neighborhood gradually joined in. Their laughter and shouts filled the air, sounds of a healthy, living community. A year ago, Patricia would have sent violation notices about the noise. Now it was just kids being kids, which is exactly how it should be. That afternoon, I received a registered letter from the HOA's insurance company. It was a check for $5,000, additional compensation that their lawyers had determined was owed to me for loss of use of my property during the months the case was in litigation. I stared at the check, not quite believing it. I called Rebecca. "Did you know about this?" "I may have had some communications with their insurance company," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "After Patricia was convicted, they did a full review of the case and decided they wanted to make absolutely certain you were fully compensated. They are trying to avoid any further liability. Rebecca, I cannot thank you enough for everything you have done. Owen, this case was one of the most satisfying of my career. You stood up for yourself when a lot of people would have just accepted the loss. You took on a corrupt system and won. And then you did not stop there. You actually changed things for the better. That is rare." After we hung up, I sat in my restored garden, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. It had started with a divorce that left me broken and searching for purpose. I had found that purpose in creating a garden, a space of peace and growth. When that was taken from me, I could have given up. A lot of people would have. The legal fees, the time, the stress, it would have been easier to just accept the loss and move on. But something in me refused to accept that Patricia and her corrupt HOA could just take what was mine, destroy what I had built, and face no consequences. So I fought. And in fighting, I discovered I was not alone. I discovered a whole neighborhood of people who were tired of being bullied, who were ready to stand together. The $50,000 was not just compensation for a destroyed garden. It was a statement that justice mattered, that individuals had rights that even HOAs had to respect, that abuse of power had consequences. Patricia going to prison was not something I took pleasure in exactly. I did not hate her as a person, but I believed deeply that she needed to face consequences for her actions. She had not just destroyed my garden. She had embezzled money, intimidated and harassed dozens of people, and abused her position for years. The criminal charges and convictions sent a message that this behavior was not acceptable. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, I walked among the plants, touching leaves, checking for pests, pulling a few weeds. This was meditation for me, this connection with growing things. Each plant was a tiny miracle, a seed transformed into something living and productive. The apple tree caught my eye, its branches heavy with developing fruit. It was not the tree I had planted, but it was becoming part of my story nonetheless. Next spring, it would bloom, and in a few years, it would be mature and full, a living reminder of this entire experience. I heard footsteps and turned to see my next-door neighbor, Harold, a retired military veteran in his 70s. He rarely spoke to anyone, kept to himself mostly. "Owen," he said, approaching the fence. "I wanted to say something. I have lived in this neighborhood for 12 years. I watched Patricia take over the HOA and turn it into her personal kingdom. I watched her bully people, fine them for stupid things, make their lives miserable, and I did nothing. I told myself it was not my problem, that I should just stay out of it." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "When she destroyed your garden, I watched from my window. I saw your face when you realized what was happening, and I still did nothing. I am ashamed of that." "Harold, no, let me finish. What you did, fighting back, organizing everyone, taking back the HOA, that took courage. You did not have to do all that. You could have just taken your settlement and moved on, but you stayed and you made things better for everyone. I wanted you to know that I see that, and I respect it. And I am sorry I did not stand with you sooner." I reached across the fence and shook his hand. "You are standing now. That is what matters. Patricia thrived because good people did nothing. But now we know better. Now we know that we have to stand together, or people like her will always win." Harold nodded, his eyes wet. "My wife, before she passed 5 years ago, she loved to garden. Patricia made her remove her roses because they were not on the approved plant list. It broke her heart. Looking at your garden now, it reminds me of her. She would have liked you. I wish I could have met her. And Harold, if you ever want to plant roses again, do it. No one is going to stop you now." He smiled, a rare expression on his weathered face. "Maybe I will." Over the next weeks, something beautiful happened in Riverside Meadows. People started personalizing their homes again. Colorful front doors appeared. Gardens sprouted in yards that had been barren grass for years. Decorative touches that reflected people's personalities replaced the sterile uniformity Patricia had enforced. The neighborhood became vibrant, diverse, alive. Property values, which Patricia had claimed to protect, actually increased. Turns out people would rather live in a community that feels like home than in a pristine but soulless subdivision ruled by fear. The garden club's first meeting had 32 people attend. We met in my restored garden on a Saturday morning, and I taught basic composting, seed starting, and pest management. People asked questions, shared their own experiences, and made plans to help each other. By the end of the meeting, we had organized tool sharing, a seed library, and a schedule for monthly workshops. Mrs. Kim volunteered to teach about Korean vegetable gardening. Tom offered to build raised beds for anyone who needed them. Margaret, who was a retired teacher, said she would work with kids in the neighborhood who wanted to learn about growing food. It was everything I had hoped for and more. The garden Patricia destroyed had been mine alone. This new garden and the community growing around it belonged to everyone. In October, I received an invitation to speak at a regional HOA management conference. Apparently, my case had attracted attention from people trying to reform how HOAs operated. I was nervous about public speaking, but agreed to do it. The conference was in Seattle, and Rebecca came with me for moral support. I stood in front of about 200 HOA board members, property managers, and homeowners, and told my story. HOAs serve an important function, I said. They maintain common areas, organize communities, and protect property values. But too often, they become tools for petty tyrants who care more about power than people. Patricia Vandermeer is an extreme example, but the dynamics that allowed her to operate exist in communities across the country. I talked about transparency, accountability, and the importance of homeowners staying engaged with their HOAs. I talked about knowing your rights and not being afraid to push back against unreasonable rules. And I talked about the responsibility of board members to serve their communities rather than rule over them. The response was overwhelming. People lined up afterward to ask questions, share their own stories, and ask for advice. Several gave me their contact information and asked if I would consult on their HOA problems. I was not sure I wanted to become an HOA reform advocate, but I could not turn away people who needed help. Over the following months, I did consult with several communities dealing with problems similar to what Riverside Meadows had experienced. Some cases were resolved through negotiation. Others required legal action. In every case, I emphasized the importance of homeowners standing together and not accepting abuse of power. My own life settled into a new rhythm. I worked my engineering job during the day. I tended my garden in the evenings and on weekends. I attended HOA board meetings where we actually solved problems instead of creating them. I taught garden club workshops once a month. I had dinner with neighbors who had become real friends. On a cold evening in December, almost exactly 1 year after Judge Morrison's initial ruling, I stood in my garden looking at the Christmas lights I had strung through the greenhouse. The plants inside were mostly dormant now, resting for winter, but the space was still beautiful. My phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize. "Hello, Mr. Granger. This is Patricia Vandermeer." I froze, surprised into silence for a moment. "What do you want, Patricia?" "I am calling from prison. I get limited phone time, and I wanted to use some of it to talk to you." She sounded tired, defeated, nothing like the imperious woman I had known. "I've been doing some thinking, a lot of thinking, and I wanted to say that I am sorry. Sorry for what I did to your garden, for how I treated you and everyone in the neighborhood, for abusing my position. For all of it." She paused. "I know saying sorry does not fix anything. I destroyed something you loved. I stole money. I made people's lives miserable because it made me feel important. I was wrong." I did not know what to say. I had not expected this, had not prepared for it. "I do not expect you to forgive me," she continued. "I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what I did wrong. The counselor here has been helping me see how I used the HOA to feed my ego, to have power over people because I felt powerless in other parts of my life. That is not an excuse, just an explanation. Why are you telling me this? Because you are the one who stood up to me. You are the one who fought back when everyone else was too scared. You showed me that actions have consequences. I hated you for that for a long time. But now I realize you did me a favor. I needed to be stopped. I needed to face what I had become." We talked for a few more minutes. She asked about the neighborhood, about whether things were better now. I told her honestly that yes, things were much better. People were happy. The community was thriving. She listened and said she was glad. "I have 2 more years on my sentence," she said before we hung up. When I get out, I am moving away, starting over somewhere else, but I wanted to apologize first. You deserved that much." After the call ended, I stood in the quiet garden processing the conversation. I had not forgiven Patricia, not entirely. The wound was still too fresh, the loss too real. But hearing her acknowledge what she had done, hearing genuine remorse in her voice, it meant something. It provided a sense of closure I had not known I needed. I texted Rebecca. "You will never believe who just called me." Her response was immediate. "Patricia, how did you know?" She requested your contact information through her lawyer 2 weeks ago. I told them I would pass along the message, but it was your choice whether to respond. I assumed she would reach out directly instead. She apologized. It seemed genuine. Good. Everyone deserves a chance at redemption, even people who have done terrible things. Whether she actually changes remains to be seen, but acknowledgement is a first step. Christmas came and went. The neighborhood was transformed with lights and decorations, each house reflecting its owner's personality. No two displays were the same, and it was beautiful precisely because of that diversity. New Year's Eve, several neighbors gathered at my house for a party. We stood in my garden at midnight, bundled in coats, counting down together. When the clock struck 12, Tom popped a bottle of champagne and we toasted to new beginnings. "To Owen," Susan said, raising her glass, "for having the courage to fight back and the vision to make things better." "To all of us," I corrected, "for standing together." That is what made the difference. We drank and celebrated, and I felt genuinely happy in a way I had not in years. The garden around us, restored and growing, was a symbol of resilience. What had been destroyed had been rebuilt. What had been taken had been returned with interest. And what had been broken, both in the physical space and in the community, had been made whole again. The $50,000 settlement had covered the restoration costs, my legal fees, and left me with a small amount that I donated to a local community gardening nonprofit. The money mattered less than what it represented, validation that I had been right to fight, that justice was possible even against seemingly insurmountable odds. As winter deepened, and the garden slept beneath its blanket of mulch, I planned for spring. New seeds to plant, new varieties to try, new projects to tackle. The garden club was planning a big community garden on an unused lot the HOA owned, a project Patricia would never have approved, but that our new board had green lit immediately. Life moved forward, as it always does. The destroyed garden became a story I told, a difficult chapter that had led to better things. The lawsuit became a case study in property rights and HOA reform. Patricia became a cautionary tale about the corruption that thrives in small corners of power when good people do not pay attention. But for me, the most important outcome was simpler and more personal. I had learned that I was stronger than I thought. That community mattered more than individual pride. That fighting for justice, even when it was difficult and expensive and stressful, was worth it. Not just for myself, but for everyone who came after me. One February morning, I woke to find snow covering the garden. It was rare for Portland to get significant snow, and the sight was breathtaking. The greenhouse glowed softly in the pre-dawn light. The raised beds were white sculptures, and the apple tree wore a coat of white that made it look like something from a fairy tale. I made coffee and stood at the window, watching the sun rise over my restored garden, over the neighborhood I had helped heal, over a community that had found its strength by standing together. My phone buzzed with messages from the neighborhood group chat we had created. People sharing photos of the snow, making plans for a community snowman building contest, checking on elderly neighbors to make sure they had what they needed. This was what it meant to live in a real community. Not enforced uniformity and fear of violation notices, but genuine connection and mutual support. Patricia had tried to create the former and ended up with resentment and anger. We had built the latter, and the difference was transformative. I grabbed my coat and headed outside, coffee mug in hand, to walk through my snow-covered garden. The plants slept beneath the white blanket, resting and gathering strength for spring. In a few months, they would wake up and grow again, reaching toward the sun, producing food and beauty and life. Just like the community around me, damaged but resilient, had found a way to grow again after years under Patricia's oppressive rule. Just like I had found a way to rebuild after divorce and loss, and having my sanctuary destroyed. We were all gardens in our own way, capable of being destroyed but also capable of restoration, growth, and renewal. The snow crunched beneath my feet as I walked, and I felt at peace. The fight was over. Justice had been served. The community was healed. And my garden, destroyed and restored, stood as a permanent reminder that sometimes you have to fight for what matters, that standing up to bullies is worth it, and that even when things are destroyed, they can be rebuilt into something even better than before. As the sun climbed higher and the neighborhood came alive with people venturing out into the snow, I smiled and raised my coffee mug in a silent toast to second chances, to justice, to community, and to the resilient human spirit that refuses to be crushed no matter how much concrete gets poured over it. My garden had been paved over, but it grew again. And in the process of fighting for that garden, I had helped an entire community find its voice and its strength. That was worth more than any amount of money, more than any legal victory, more than anything Patricia had tried to take from me. Standing there in the snow on that February morning, surrounded by sleeping plants that would soon awaken, I finally let go of the last bit of anger I had been carrying. The fight was over. We had won. And now it was time to simply live, to enjoy the peace we had fought for, and to tend the garden, both the literal one around me and the metaphorical one we had cultivated in riverside meadows. The sun warmed my face, the snow sparkled like diamonds, and somewhere in the distance, I heard children laughing as they played. It was a perfect moment, hard-won and deeply appreciated. And as I turned to head back inside, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, this community would face them together, stronger and wiser for everything we had been through. The garden had taught me patience, resilience, and the value of nurturing growth. The lawsuit had taught me courage, perseverance, and the importance of fighting for justice. The community had taught me that we are stronger together than apart, that standing up to bullies protects not just ourselves but everyone around us. These were lessons I would carry forward, lessons I would share with anyone who asked, lessons that had transformed me from a divorced man seeking solace in a garden into someone who understood the true meaning of community and justice. The $50,000 was just money. The real victory was standing in my restored garden, part of a healed and thriving community, knowing that we had taken back our power from someone who abused it, and that we had created something better in its place. That was priceless. That was everything. And that was worth every difficult moment of the fight.